She told herself she was invisible, and for 3 years she had been right. Cecily Vane kept her head down and her numbers clean. That was the arrangement. Unspoken, understood. She came in at 7:40 every morning, 40 minutes before anyone else, brewed the coffee she never drank, and settled into her corner desk on the 14th floor of Kessler Holdings Limited, where the books balanced to the cent and nobody asked how. She left at 6:15, after the last of the tailored suits had gone home, or wherever tailored suits went. She did not speak unless spoken to. She did not linger near the espresso machine where the men with earpieces gathered to murmur in languages she pretended not to understand. She understood 3 of them, but understanding things was a liability in a building like this one, so Cecily kept that to herself too. Filed it away next to the offshore routing patterns she had memorized without meaning to, and the name she had once heard through a closed door that made 2 senior accountants retire the following week. She was 28 years old. She wore cardigans the color of oatmeal, and she was invisible. She had worked very hard to be. The man who owned the building, who owned, depending on who you asked, a significant portion of the eastern seaboard's less legitimate commerce, was someone Cecily had seen exactly 11 times in 3 years. She had counted, not because she was interested, because Cecily Vane counted things the way other people breathed. His name was Donovan Cress, not Don, never Don. She had heard a man called Marco use that abbreviation once, in what she assumed was an attempt at friendliness. Marco had been reassigned to the Vancouver office within the week, and Vancouver, she gathered, was not a reassignment anyone wanted. Donovan Cress was 41 years old, according to the documents that occasionally crossed her desk for reconciliation. He stood somewhere around 6'2", though Cecily had only estimated from a distance. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples. His jaw could have been cut from the limestone cliffs along Lake Superior, and he had eyes the color of the St. Lawrence in January, gray and cold and moving under the surface in ways you couldn't track from the shore. He did not notice her. This was, she reminded herself on the 11 occasions she had confirmed it, exactly as it should be. The 12th time she saw him was a Thursday in November, and it did not go the way the previous 11 had. Cecily was late. This was unprecedented. She had spilled Earl Grey across the front of her ivory blouse at the Spadina subway station, changed into the spare cardigan she kept in her desk drawer. Dove grey, slightly pilled at the cuffs, and arrived at 7:53, which meant 13 minutes of exposure to the morning movement of people who were not accountants. She kept her eyes on the floor tile and moved fast. She was halfway across the marble lobby when a shoulder connected with hers, hard, deliberate, the kind of shoulder that didn't need to apologize and knew it. She stumbled, grabbed the edge of the reception desk, and looked up into the face of a man she didn't recognize. Thick neck. Small eyes set too close together. The particular smile of someone who had spent their life learning that they could smile like that without consequence. Watch it, he said, though he had been the one walking into her. Sorry, Cecily said, because she always said sorry. It was a reflex. She had been apologizing for her own existence since roughly the 3rd grade. She moved around him toward the elevator bank. She did not hear him follow until the elevator doors were already sliding shut. His hand caught the door. Cecily stood with her back to the brushed steel wall of the elevator car and did not let herself look afraid because fear was also a liability, and she had enough of those already. 14th floor, the man said, and pressed the button himself even though she'd already pressed it. He stood too close. His cologne was the kind that costs $400 and smells like a threat. The elevator moved. Cecily stared at the floor indicator and ran numbers in her head. 14 floors. Approximately 45 seconds. She could do 45 seconds. You work up here, he asked. Accounting, she said, which was not really an answer. Right. He let his eyes move over her in a way that had nothing to do with accounting. Cress lets them hire anyone these days. She did not respond. I'm Torrance, he said, like this was supposed to mean something. Boyd Torrance. I've got a meeting with him this morning. A pause. Important one. Cecily kept her eyes on the doors. You could put in a good word, he said, and then he laughed, the kind of laugh that was also a reminder. If you talked to anyone. The doors opened. She walked out without looking back, sat down at her desk and opened the Q3 reconciliation file. Her hands were steady. She had learned to keep her hands steady. She did not see Boyd Torrance again for 4 hours, and she did not think about him in the interim, because thinking about things like Boyd Torrance was not something she could afford. Instead, she worked through the irregular disbursements in column 7. flagged a transfer that didn't have a corresponding invoice, cross-referenced the shell accounts in the Cayman routing she wasn't supposed to know existed, and ate half a blueberry scone at her desk at noon. At 2:17 in the afternoon, something went wrong on the 14th floor. She heard it before she understood it. A change in the air pressure of the building, or something like that. Some shift in the quality of the silence that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Then she heard a voice in the hallway. Not loud, quietly, methodically furious in a way that was worse than shouting. She recognized the voice because she had spent 3 years carefully not listening to it. Donovan Cress. She kept her eyes on her screen and turned her hearing off the way she'd learned to. The way you learn all survival skills, by necessity and repetition. She caught fragments anyway. A name she didn't recognize, the word ledger, and then, very clearly, through 2 walls and a closed door, words she absolutely should not have heard. Pull every record from the last 18 months, accounting all of it, and find out which one of them has been talking. Cecily's fingers went still on the keyboard. She looked at the column of numbers in front of her. She had been the one to flag the transfer. She should have left. She knew that the moment she filed the anomaly report at 3 o'clock and sent it through the internal system the way she always did. Clean, documented, routed to the compliance address. Standard procedure. The kind of thing an invisible person did because invisible people followed procedures and procedures kept you safe. She was gathering her coat at 5:45 when 2 men appeared in the doorway of the accounting suite. Not the usual security. These 2 had a different quality about them. The particular stillness of people who had learned to wait in ways that cost something to learn. Cecily Vane, the taller one said. It was not a question. Yes, she said, because lying would have been worse. Mr. Cress would like to speak with you. She had prepared for many things over 3 years of working in the margins of Donovan Cress's empire. A quiet dismissal, maybe, a reassignment of her own. She had not quite prepared for this, but she picked up her bag and she followed them. Because the alternative was not following them, and she was not naive about what that alternative looked like. His office occupied the northwest corner of the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city toward Lake Ontario, the water dark silver in the November dusk. The skyline of Toronto glittered at the edges of the frame like something expensive and indifferent. He was standing at the window when she came in. She had thought 11 times that he was tall. She had underestimated. He turned around. The grey eyes landed on her and she felt the specific discomfort of being seen by someone who actually looked. "Close the door," he said. The 2 men disappeared. Cecily stood in the middle of the room with her bag over her shoulder, and her coat folded over her arm and met his gaze, because looking away felt more dangerous than holding it. "You flagged a transfer," he said. "Yes, at 3 or 4 this afternoon. Yes, tell me what you found." So she did. She was not nervous when she explained numbers. Numbers were solid. Numbers did not lie. Numbers were the only language she had ever trusted completely. She walked him through the irregular disbursement, the missing invoice trail, the Cayman routing that looped back through a holding company in Luxembourg and emerged 3 transfers later as a clean wire into an account she did not recognize. She told him the amount. She told him the dates. She told him the pattern she had noticed 6 weeks ago and had been quietly watching since, building the documentation, waiting until she was certain. When she finished, the office was quiet. Donovan Cress looked at her for a long moment. Not the way Boyd Torrance had looked at her. This was something different. The focused attention of someone cataloging what they were seeing, filing it somewhere careful. "You've known about this for 6 weeks, he said. "I wanted to be sure before I reported it." "And you're sure now." "To 5 decimal places," she said. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile. The suggestion of one maybe in the way his eyes shifted. "All right," he said. "Sit down, Miss Vane." She sat. They were in that office for 2 hours. By the time she left, she had walked him through every anomaly she had flagged and quietly catalogued over the past 3 years. Things she had noticed and documented and filed in encrypted folders on a drive she kept at home. Not out of self-preservation, or not only that, but because incorrect numbers offended her on a level that was almost physical. He listened. He asked precise questions. He did not interrupt her. At 7:45, his assistant knocked and said the car was waiting. Donovan Cress looked up from the document spread across his desk and said, "Mems, Vane stays." She stayed. At 9:15, he ordered food from somewhere that answered the phone in Italian and didn't ask for a name. and 2 men arrived with bags that smelled like garlic and fresh bread, and she ate pasta at the conference table in the office of the man who ran the most sophisticated criminal organization east of the Rockies. And they talked about a discrepancy in the Luxembourg filing, and it was the strangest evening of her life. She went home at 11. She did not sleep. Boyd Torrance. She learned the next morning through the precise alchemy of overheard conversation and inference, had left the building at 5:30 the previous afternoon and had not arrived at his hotel. She learned this the way she learned most things, by being invisible, by listening to what people said when they thought no one was processing it. She filed it away. She did not think about what it meant. She was very good at not thinking about things she could not change. What she could not file away, could not make herself not think about, was the fact that for the first time in 3 years she had felt not invisible, specifically, deliberately seen, in a room that contained one of the most dangerous men in the country, and it had not felt like danger. It had felt like something she didn't have a word for yet, which was its own kind of frightening. She wore her grey cardigan, she kept her head down, she did the numbers. 3 days passed, then a week. The anomaly she had flagged was quietly corrected. The Luxembourg account vanished from the routing tree. 2 men from the compliance floor were walked out by security on a Tuesday afternoon, and nobody talked about it, and Cecily understood why, and she did not ask. She had almost convinced herself that she had gone back to being invisible. Then the message appeared in her internal system, flagged urgent, from a sender ID she didn't recognize. Stay in the building tonight. Do not take the subway. She stared at it for 45 seconds. Then she closed the file and kept working. At 6:30, when the floor had emptied and she was shutting down her station, the elevator at the end of the hall opened and Donovan Kress walked out of it. He crossed the floor to her desk. He did not look hurried. He never looked hurried. She had noticed that in the same peripheral way she noticed everything. The way his presence altered the air in a room the moment he entered it. The particular economy of how he moved. He stopped in front of her desk. "Someone tried to access your building file this afternoon," he said. "Remote query. Your home address." Cecily looked up at him. Her voice was level. "Someone connected to the Luxembourg account." "We believe so." She absorbed this. "I see you're coming with me," he said. "I have a cat," she said, which was not the most tactical response she had ever produced, but it was the honest one. He looked at her for a moment. Then he took out his phone and said 2 words to whoever answered. He looked back at her. "Your cat will be collected," he said, "and taken to my residence. Is there anything else?" Cecily looked at him for a long moment. She thought about saying something sensible. Something measured and professional about not wanting to impose. "My laptop," she said instead. "There are files on there. Bring it." She brought it. His residence was a penthouse on King Street West, which she had expected. She had not expected the wall of windows facing the lake, the particular quiet of a space that had been designed to contain someone who needed silence the way other people needed sound. She had not expected the kitchen, which was enormous and clearly used. She had not expected the housekeeper, a small woman named Mrs. Farrow, who appeared with tea and did not treat it as unusual that a woman in a pilled grey cardigan was arriving at 9 at night with a laptop bag and no luggage. She had not expected the cat carrier that arrived at 10:15, or the fact that Donovan Kress, who was on a phone call in what she assumed was Russian, broke off mid-sentence when the carrier arrived and crouched down in the entrance hall of his penthouse to look through the mesh at a 7-year-old orange tabby named Wallace. "He bites," she said from the hallway. Donovan reached a finger through the mesh. Wallace did not bite. He pushed his enormous flat face into Donovan's finger with the smug confidence of an animal that understood nothing about the world and was better for it. "He doesn't bite me," Donovan said. She had no response to this. She was given a room that was larger than her apartment on Palmerston Boulevard. She sat on the edge of the bed with Wallace on her lap and tried to understand how she had arrived here. In this room, in this life, in the specific gravitational field of a man who was very probably responsible for several things she did not want to know about, and somehow also crouched on his floor making friends with her cat. She was not stupid enough to think she was safe. She was, against all instruction of her own good sense, starting to think she might be something else. The threat resolved itself in ways she was only partially told about over the next 4 days. She understood the shape of it from the edges. A man named Crispin Hale, who had been running a secondary extraction scheme through the Luxembourg account. skimming from Cress's operations into his own offshore structure, and who had realized that the quiet woman in accounting had found it. Crispin Hale, she gathered, had attempted to acquire her address and had then attempted to acquire her. He had not succeeded at the second. She did not ask what success of the first kind had looked like for Crispin Hale. She worked from the penthouse. She had her laptop. She had access to the secure VPN. And she had Wallace, who had entirely abandoned his loyalty to her and now spent most of his time on the back of a leather sofa in the main room, watching Donovan Cress with the devotion of a convert. They fell into something she did not have a name for. In the mornings, she worked at the kitchen table. He brought coffee, proper coffee, the kind that required equipment she could not have identified, and set it near her without comment. In the evenings, they ate. Sometimes she cooked. She was good at it, quietly proud of it in the way she was quietly proud of all the things she was good at, that no one had ever asked her to demonstrate. He ate everything she put in front of him with the focused appreciation of someone who had spent years eating in restaurants where the food was expensive and nobody cared if he liked it. They talked. This was what she hadn't anticipated. Not the danger, not the dislocation, but the talking, about the numbers at first and then about other things. He had a mind like a piece of machinery that had been very finely calibrated, precise, fast, capable of holding several moving parts without losing track of any of them. He was not warm exactly, but he was present. When she spoke, he listened the way few people had ever listened to her, completely, without waiting for a pause so he could speak, without looking at his phone. On the third evening, she was washing up after dinner, and he was drying, which she had not expected. She had been preparing to do it herself, and she said, without planning to, "I know I'm not what you're used to dealing with." He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the pot she was rinsing. I'm aware that I'm not, that the situation is," she stopped. She was not usually inarticulate. She found it mortifying. "I'm not trying to be difficult. About any of it. You haven't been difficult," he said. "I just mean," she put the pot in the drying rack, "you don't have to be kind about it. About bringing me here. I understand it's a practical arrangement." The silence lasted long enough that she looked up. He was watching her with that direct, cataloguing attention that she had learned, over 4 days, to brace for. "Is that what you think this is?" he said. It was not quite a question, isn't it? He set down the dish he was drying. He turned toward her, leaning back against the counter, and looked at her the way he looked at balance sheets, with the specific focus of someone who needed the numbers to be accurate before he moved. "Cecily," he said. He used her first name. He had not done that before. "I have been aware of you since your 3rd month at the firm." She blinked. "That's not possible." I made sure to. "You came in 40 minutes early every day. You flagged 3 irregularities in your first quarter that my head of compliance had missed. You eat lunch at your desk, and you always bring something with dried cranberries in it." He paused. "You wear headphones, but you never play music loud enough to actually block sound. You listen to everything." She stared at him. "I don't hire invisible people," he said. "I hired you because you were the opposite. I was waiting to see how long it took you to stop pretending otherwise." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the windows, the lake was a dark absence between the city lights. "That's 3 years," she said finally. "You're thorough," he said. "I respect that." She laughed. It surprised her. The sound of it, real and unguarded. In this kitchen that still smelled like the garlic chicken she had made from a recipe her grandmother had given her, and then modified over 8 years until it was hers. He was watching her laugh with an expression she couldn't quite name. Something careful and certain at the same time. "I liked it," she said. "Being invisible. It felt safe." "I know," he said. "That's the part I'm less interested in." Crispin Hale was dealt with. She did not know the details, and she did not want to. She understood the parameters of the world she moved through, had understood them since she first took the job with her eyes open, and her conscience negotiated into a quieter room inside her chest, and she had decided then what she was willing to be responsible for. She kept the books clean. She flagged the fraud. The rest was not her department. She went back to Palmerston Boulevard on a Friday. Her apartment had been checked. She did not ask by whom, and declared clear. Mrs. Farrow had packed a bag of food from the penthouse kitchen that could not reasonably be called anything other than a care package. Wallace was returned to his carrier with considerably less dignity than he felt he deserved. Donovan Cress walked her down to the lobby. She did not expect that. At the glass doors, with the November wind pressing grey and cold off the lake and her bag over her shoulder, and Wallace protesting softly in his carrier, she stopped and looked up at him. "Thank you," she said, "for the room, and for Wallace, he's welcome back," he said. "So are you." She nodded. She was almost through the doors. Cecily. She turned. He was standing in the lobby of his own building with his hands in his pockets, which she had never seen him do, and he was looking at her with an expression that had finally abandoned its careful ambiguity. "Dinner," he said. "Sunday, not a debrief." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about invisible, about safe, about the specific exhaustion of spending 3 years disappearing on purpose, making herself smaller and quieter and less until she nearly believed it herself. She thought about a man who had watched her for 3 years and waited, with the patience of someone who understood that thorough things took time. "Sunday," she said. She pushed through the door into the cold. She was smiling before she reached the sidewalk, and she did not try to stop it. And the wind off the lake was sharp and real against her face, and she thought, for the first time in a long time, that being seen was not the most frightening thing in the world. It might, in fact, be the beginning of something she had not let herself want. Wallace yowled from his carrier, indignant and certain of his own importance, and Cecily Vane walked home through the grey Toronto afternoon with her head up.